Be taking a deep dive into some pretty in-depth discussions about Black culture and success.
Yes.
You guys sent in quite a collection of YouTube transcripts.
Mhm.
We've got Angela Stanton King, Jawanza Kunjufu Amala Ekpunobi, and even a film from 1954 called The Secret of Selling the Negro.
Wow.
So buckle up, because we're going to be encountering some pretty strong opinions here.
It is interesting, though, how all these diverse voices all kind of grapple with the same central question.
Yeah.
How do both internal and external forces shape the landscape of what we consider to be Black success?
Right, and that's what's so fascinating about looking at these sources together.
Yeah.
So let's start with Angela Stanton King.
Okay.
She uses this term, Black supremacy, and she really kind of throws down a gauntlet when it comes to personal responsibility.
She really doesn't shy away from strong language.
Right.
But I think what's compelling is her challenge to what you might call the traditional narrative.
Yeah.
You know, she argues that when you focus solely on white supremacy as the root of all problems, that in and of itself can become a form of Black supremacy.
It's interesting.
That it almost lets individuals off the hook.
It's a jarring concept when you first hear it.
It is.
Because it feels like she's saying, hey, let's not ignore the issues within the Black community while calling out these injustices from outside.
Exactly.
Oh.
She points to things like Black on Black crime, and she uses this really, I don't know if disturbing is the right word, but this very stark phrase. When she refers to it, she calls it the 2-for-1 special.
Wow.
Because you have, the death, and then you have the incarceration.
Right.
And she also condemns Black women who have abortions while simultaneously condemning racism.
Right.
So she's drawing this very stark comparison that I think is meant to really make people think about, well, are we being consistent in our values within the Black community?
So her perspective really kind of flips the script. Instead of just pointing fingers outward, it's like she's urging this introspection, a look in the mirror at behaviors that are hindering progress.
Exactly.
And this brings us to a debate that comes up a lot, this tension between personal responsibility versus systemic factors.
Absolutely.
Like, do we prioritize holding individuals accountable, or do we focus on dismantling these systems that are creating these unequal playing fields?
It's a constant tension.
Yeah, and Stanton King seems to lean heavily towards personal accountability.
Yes, she does.
So then we have Jawanza Kunjufu, and this tension between those two things comes up again, but in a different context with him, because he's laser focused on the role of family, and specifically the absence of fathers in many Black homes.
Okay.
And he says very plainly, only men can make boys men.
Now, it's important to remember
that
Kunjufu was speaking in 1987.
Yeah.
At a time when anxieties about family structure were very high. And just to throw a statistic out there, 62% of Black children lived in single-mother households.
Oh, no.
Back then.
And in 1987.
In 1987.
So something for you guys listening to think about.
Yeah.
How much have things changed? How much have they stayed the same? But regardless of that statistic, his core argument remains relevant.
Yes.
This idea that positive Black male role models are absolutely crucial for these young men. And he paints this picture of these boys just kind of floundering, lacking guidance. Almost destined to stumble down destructive paths.
That he does. And it could be a bleak picture.
Yes.
But it comes from, I think, a place of deep concern. For the well-being of young Black men. And while some of his views on gender roles might seem outdated, I think his emphasis on the importance of positive mentorship really transcends time.
Positive influence, whether it's from fathers, uncles, or community leaders, it's undeniably impactful.
It is.
And he ties this directly to the economic landscape. He argues that when Black men lack opportunity, they get pushed out of the family structure, and then they can't fulfill that mentorship role. So it becomes this vicious cycle.
It's a question of cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
Do limited opportunities lead to family breakdown, or does family breakdown lead to limited opportunities? And this is where the film, The Secret of Selling the Negro, offers an interesting contrast. Because this was filmed in 1954.
Wow.
And it paints a surprisingly optimistic picture
Really?
of a growing Black middle class. And it emphasizes their purchasing power as a force for change.
So we have these two very different snapshots,
Yes.
decades apart. Kunju-fu focusing on the lack, and this film highlighting the potential.
Exactly. And it shows how economic conditions really shape the narratives around Black success.
They do, for sure.
And this leads us perfectly to Amala Ekpunobi.
Okay.
Who is very critical of what she calls ghetto Black culture.
Right.
And she's referring to a subculture that she sees as focused on gang violence, hypersexuality, and materialism.
Right. And she doesn't hold back.
No, she doesn't.
And saying how she thinks that this specific image negatively impacts perceptions of Black Americans as a whole. And she feels that it overshadows the reality of many Black Americans who are middle class.
Right.
And striving for more.
Exactly. She's raising this question about representation.
Yeah.
Like, is there an oversaturation of one very specific facet of Black culture in the media?
Yeah.
And if so, how does that affect people's perceptions?
Right.
Does it reinforce stereotypes?
Does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Potentially.
So it makes you wonder, is there this gap between the diverse reality of Black life and the singular image that gets projected and then consumed by society?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it really does raise these questions about the power of narrative. Like, if the dominant story about Black culture is all poverty and dysfunction, then it becomes harder to break free.
Right? Like, you're boxed in by those expectations.
Exactly.
Even if it doesn't match your values or aspirations.
And that pressure to conform to those expectations is a key part of what Kunju-fu is talking about when he discusses the Black peer group.
Right.
He suggests that just fitting in can often be seen as more important than academic achievement.
It's true.
There's this pressure to act Black in a way that can actually stifle intellectual curiosity.
And he even tells the story about himself as a student being discouraged from debating.
Oh, wow.
Because it wasn't seen as cool.
It's fascinating how these pressures play out.
It makes you think about how hard it can be to navigate that.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to find your own path.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Embracing your culture, but also pursuing personal growth.
Right.
Which might not align with your immediate peer group.
Right.
And Kunju-fu suggests finding like-minded peers. Or even mastering the art of being both cool and intellectually engaged.
Like playing both sides.
Yeah. I think that's a struggle a lot of young people face.
Absolutely.
Regardless of background.
It's universal.
How do you stay true to yourself while also, navigating the social landscape?
Yeah. And for Black youth, it's often amplified by this issue of internalized racism, which Kunju-fu connects to this lack of positive representation in the media.
Right. So it reinforces Ekpunobi's critique of ghetto Black culture.
Yeah.
So are these portrayals a reflection of a real problem, or are they contributing to it?
It's like a chicken or the egg thing.
By perpetuating this very limited and often negative view of Blackness.
Absolutely. And it raises questions about cause and effect.
Yeah.
Does internalized racism lead to negative portrayals or vice versa?
Right.
Kunju-fu thinks one way to combat this is to highlight what he calls Black excellence.
Okay.
So celebrating achievements of Black people.
Throughout history and in contemporary society.
Exactly.
It's about showcasing those role models who defy those stereotypes.
Yes.
But how do we define Black excellence? That's a good question.
Could this emphasis on achievement create a divide within the Black community?
Yeah. Does focusing on the extraordinary overshadow the everyday triumphs?
Right.
And does this focus on Black excellence unintentionally feed into those stereotypes?
Right.
By implying that Black success is somehow unusual?
It's almost like we're dancing around this question of what success truly looks like for the Black community.
But in the Black community.
Is it defined by money and professional status?
Right. Are there other equally valuable measures of success
that we need to recognize and celebrate?
Yeah. And this brings us back to Kunju-fu's point about the peer group.
Okay.
Because he suggests that for a lot of young Black people, social acceptance within their community might carry more weight than those external markers of success.
So he's saying that sometimes mainstream values, which emphasize things like money and status, might clash with the values in certain segments of the Black community.
It's fascinating, right? This tension between different value systems.
Where social standing or creative expression or community contributions might take precedence.
It speaks to this complexity of cultural identity.
how do you navigate these pressures?
Yeah, how do you reconcile those individual aspirations with those expectations of your community?
Right.
And we have to be careful not to oversimplify this.
Of course.
Because the Black experience is not monolithic.
Right.
There's a spectrum of perspectives.
For sure.
And experiences within the community.
And it's important to avoid generalizations.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that all this is happening within a larger societal context.
Right.
Where systemic racism and inequality continue to have a real impact.
Yeah, we can't talk about Black culture and success without acknowledging those systemic barriers.
It's a good reminder that this isn't just theoretical.
Yeah.
These are real people with real lives facing real challenges.
And ultimately, it's about finding solutions, right?
Yeah. How do we create a more equitable society where all Black people have a chance to thrive?
Where Black success is the rule and not the exception.
Exactly.
Those are some big questions.
They are.
And we might not have all the answers.
But having these conversations, digging into these issues.
It's a step in the right direction.
It's about challenging assumptions, confronting uncomfortable truths, and considering different perspectives.
And moving beyond just acknowledging the problem of systemic racism and actually exploring ways to dismantle it.
It pushes us to think critically about the messages we're sending.
To young Black people.
About what it means to be Black.
About what it means to be successful.
And how those identities intersect.
Before we wrap up, what's really sticking with you from this deep dive?
Stanton King's use of Black supremacy, while it's definitely provocative, it raises a good point.
Okay.
By focusing only on white supremacy, do we risk neglecting individual responsibility, for actions and choices?
That's a lot to ponder.
It is.
It makes you think about that balance between individual agency and these larger societal forces. Yeah, where do you draw that line?
Right. It's a tough question.
Yeah.
No easy answers, but it's a conversation worth having.
Yeah.
Especially if we want to move beyond just placing blame.
Right, and towards actual solutions.
Exactly.
And maybe that's the big takeaway here. There's no one narrative, no one size fits all.
No.
To understanding this idea of Black culture and success.
We've seen so many perspectives.
Right. We've got Stanton King with that emphasis on personal responsibility. We've got Kunjufu talking about family structure and mentorship. Ekpunobi's critique of the media.
And even that look back in time.
Yeah.
With Secret of Selling the Negro.
Each one offering a piece of the puzzle. Right. But none of them holding the whole picture.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
It forces us to think critically, challenge assumptions, and recognize that diversity of thought within the Black community.
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
Some heavy topics, but hopefully you're walking away with more questions than answers.
Because sometimes the right questions are more valuable than simple solutions.
Absolutely. So we haven't solved all the world's problems in this one conversation, but hopefully we've sparked some new ideas.
New ways of thinking
about these issues.
Here's something else to consider.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about those external forces,
Yeah.
Systemic racism, media portrayals.
Economic disparity.
But what about the internal forces?
Oh, that's interesting.
Things like self-perception, cultural values, even spirituality.
Right. We focus so much on the barriers, the obstacles. But what about resilience?
Exactly.
The power of belief.
That's where the work begins.
It is.
Empowering individuals not only to dismantle those external barriers, but to build up those internal resources.
Right. Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Yeah, been a journey.
Intense, but insightful.
So much ground covered.
Yeah.
And hopefully we've given you, the listener, some new perspectives, some new questions to ponder.
Remember, the journey of understanding never really ends.
It's ongoing.
So keep digging, keep questioning, keep striving for that more just and equitable world.
Where Black success is not a surprise, but a celebration of that human potential we all share.
Until next time, keep learning.